Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Reoccurring Wilt, a possible new cotton disease. QDAF pathologists are currently investigating a likely new pathogen, and this webinar is going to provide you with the latest details on this possible new disease. My name's Janelle Montgomery and I'm a Regional Extension Officer with CottonInfo based in Moree. I'm joined here today with Dr. Linda Smith, Principal Pathologist with QDAF, Shana Holman, CottonInfo Biosecurity Technical Lead, and Sal Sini, the Research Direction and Stewardship Policy Officer with Cotton Australia. With no further ado, I would like to hand over to Dr. Linda Smith, Principal Pathologist with QDAF. Thank you, Linda.
What I'm going to cover today is what is reoccurring wilt, just the background of the situation, how we came to be notified about this condition, the symptoms, how it is similar to sudden wilt and how it is different from sudden wilt, where it's been detected so far currently, and most importantly, how to collect plant samples, because we need to know where potentially this new disease is. So firstly, the background. So what was observed by consultants and growers in a field in central Queensland was this sudden wilting and death of cotton plants. Initially, this dying patch was just a small patch in one field. The second year into cotton, it was larger, and in the third year, it was significantly larger. So the concern was that the symptoms were very similar to the exotic disease Texas root rot. So this is a photo here of Texas root rot, the exotic. Typically, the dead leaves remain on the plant. You do see a white tan fungus on the roots. We did not see that on the plants in central Queensland, but the other symptoms, such as the dead leaves remaining on the plant and the suddenness of the wilting and dying, and just the appearance, were very, very similar to Texas root rot. So this was reported to biosecurity. At the time, there were no cotton plant soil, so they recommended that they could do some DNA extraction from that soil and try and detect Texas root rot. As soon as that field went back into cotton, symptomatic and healthy plants were collected by biosecurity, and we also DAF collected plants later on as well. So what did they find? Well, thankfully, the soil samples using molecular testing was negative for Texas root rot. Plants were all negative for Texas root rot, as well as the symptomatic plants. And the plants that we collected were also negative for Texas root rot. So it was very, very clear that it is not an exotic that was causing these symptoms. But interestingly, there was this consistent isolation of a fungus, and I'm going to refer to this just as fungus A because I don't want to talk about what we found until we can confirm that this is the fungus causing the disease. So I'll just refer to it as fungus A. But it was consistently isolated from 11 out of 12 plants that biosecurity collected and 14 out of the 18 plants that DAF collected. And also, the plants that were collected were at different stages of development of the disease. So it wasn't just dead plants, it was from wilting plants in various stages. We also did some isolations. Once we knew it wasn't Texas root rot, we were able to do isolations in our own lab, and these were then confirmed by GrowHelp that again this same fungus has been isolated. We collected diseased roots and soil later in the season, and we sent those to CSIRO, and they determined that this fungus occupied a very high percentage of the diseased roots, and it was also in the soil. So we were getting this consistent isolation of a fungus that is not currently associated with disease in cotton. So the symptoms, how are they similar to sudden wilt? There is wilting and sudden death. It doesn't take long for the plants from wilting to then become a dead plant. That's very similar to sudden wilt. However, the differences was that this same area was showing disease, and that doesn't occur with sudden wilt. Usually you wouldn't see disease in the same area. And also this was getting larger every season. The symptoms weren't quite right for sudden wilt either. We were seeing this leaf bronzing. It's not a really bright sort of colour like you would get with senescence, but it is a bronzing. The other factor that wasn't what you would normally associate with sudden wilt is it wasn't sort of an irrigation or rain event followed by hot conditions, because that is very common to be a trigger for the wilting and death of plants with sudden wilt. So now I'm going to just show you some photos of the symptoms. So this is very early in the onset, and this was about a hectare of plants showing symptoms. So if you follow the red lines, you'll be able to see just plants wilting. You can just see some leaf wilting, and they're just scattered through the field amongst healthy plants. But then the wilting becomes more significant, and eventually the plants do die. And then in the photo on the right, this is the bronzing I was referring to, just sort of an odd colour to the plants that are starting to wilt and die. Here you can see in this bottom photo that the leaves of the wilting and dying plants remain attached, which was very similar to Texas root rot. And here is a close-up of that wilting. Just suddenly the leaves starting to droop. And what was interesting was the sporadic nature of these plants dying. There wasn't like a typical pattern. It was just, you would see healthy plants, and interspersed in the field were these dying plants. Here, again, just some varying stages of plant growth that were affected. So right from squaring through to the more mature plants, all through the stages of plant growth, plants were wilting and dying. So it wasn't at any particular growth stage. There was various stages or various reddening. This is sort of a very extreme reddening that we saw on some of the younger plants. And what was typical also was if you try to pull the plant out, the affected plant out of the soil, the taproot, it was rotten, but it wasn't like a wet rot, it's like a dry rot, and it snapped off very easily. So to remove it, you need to actually dig the root system out. Here are some symptoms. This is the reddening, so it's not as intense as those previous photos. These are more mature plants, but you can see this reddening. When we peel back the bark, here's the reddening, you see this red streaking in the plant, in the stem and the root. And then plant death. So at the end of the season, there was a significant amount of this field that had died. And I don't know if you can remember that picture of the Texas root rot, but it's very, very similar. Have we detected it so far? So in central Queensland, there are 4 farms that have been detected. One farm had significant death. One field had significant death. Another field in a different farm had plants dying off interspersed, not in a large area of the field, but enough that it was quite noticeable to the grower. The other 2 fields on different farms was just a couple of dead plants that during surveys, because we alerted them to this condition, sent them in and we isolated the same fungus. In the Namoi and Guida, you in Africa during their surveys have also detected the same fungus from dead plants in 2017 and 2019. So now we need to determine, how widespread is this in the industry. So what is industry doing? The first thing we are doing is obviously, is this fungus that we've isolated, is it the causal agent? And this is a scientific procedure called Koch's postulates. So that involves consistently isolating a microorganism from a diseased plant and not finding it in the healthy plant, which we have done. It also then involves having a pure culture of that pathogen or fungus, and we've got that. You then introduce it into a healthy plant, which we have, and we are waiting for disease to develop to the same extent of what we've seen in the field. So we do have a bioassay, which I'll show you some photos, and we're hoping to get some results in the next 2 to 4 weeks. And then lastly, in this procedure, you have to re-isolate from the diseased plant an isolate that is identical to the causative agent. Currently, we have an experiment in a controlled environmental growth room, and we have inoculated plants, healthy plants in various ways, and we are monitoring the development of symptoms. And then as soon as we have significant symptoms, we'll attempt re-isolation, and that will hopefully then determine the cause. So once this is confirmed, what we'll be doing is trying to understand the basic biology. That is, how is it infecting plants? How is it spread? How does it survive? Because all of these things are going to tell us then, well, how do we manage this problem? We need to understand the host range, because we don't know if it is just cotton that is a host. There may be weed hosts, we don't know at this stage. What are the climatic factors that are going to be conducive to this disease? And then all of that information will help us manage it. But it's very important that we do understand the distribution. Obviously, we'll be looking for it during our disease surveys, but we've also got CottonInfo on the ground, and all the consultants and growers, you can all keep your eyes out, and anything that is suspicious or anything that looks like what I've shown in the photos, we certainly do want samples and information and to be notified about that. So CRDC, of course, are funding this research. Just a comment about how to collect the samples. As I mentioned, it's very easy just for the root, the taproot, to break away. So if you could, when you collect your sample, collect multiple samples if you can, with all the different symptoms that you're seeing. If possible, some healthy plants as well, but do wrap them up separately. If you need to cut the plant because it's quite large, it's in the later stages, that's fine. Just put all of those pieces into the one bag. Wrap it in newspaper or put it in a paper bag, one sample per bag, and then send it to UE in Africa if it's in New South Wales, and then to myself in Queensland. So hopefully I've covered enough there for you to have just a basic understanding of what we found and where we're at and what we would like you to do. So thank you to all the people and that I've listed on the acknowledgements, and I'm certainly happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Linda. Is it a common fungus found in the soil?
I don't know if it's common because it's something that we haven't identified before. So, so I can say that it may not be common, but we don't know because we haven't looked for this before. Don't know if that really answers your question, but that's probably the best I can say at this time. It's a group of fungi that, a family of fungi that we wouldn't be looking for, but that doesn't mean it's not commonly there.
Thanks, Linda.
Yes.
Just a question in terms of the vascular discoloration. So if we're coming into a soil that we've got different diseases which do cause that wilting, so how do we decide to recognise it as something rather than verticillium or fusarium?
That's a really good question. There is more of a staining, a spreading of the colour, rather that there is distinct sort of a vascular colour, but there was also a staining. And so because it may be difficult for people to differentiate, just send everything in to confirm. And, you know, it's always a good idea to send in fusarium anyway. So I would just say just send anything that you are suspicious of, whether it be fusarium, verticillium, or this potential new pathogen, send it in and get it confirmed.
And Linda, from your photographs, obviously it can happen quite early in the season, right through to the end. There's no where it's seen more commonly at any time within the season.
No, not in. It's a difficult one to that's difficult to answer in that probably commonly because in the majority of fields it probably was only a couple of plants, people would probably only notice that dead plant at the end of the season. They may, you wouldn't know when that started to die, or guess you can based on the size of the plant, but it may be later in the season. Because we've had the luxury this time of following in one field the stages through the whole season, we have seen this happening, with various stages of growth. So I only have one field to go on. So I wouldn't know if that was common or not for other fields.
Okay. Well, yeah. This sort of follows on a little bit, and you may or may not know, but how quickly does it develop from that initial wilt to death?
Oh, so yeah, the grower was in the 1 week he would notice wilting, and then back in the same field that week, and it would have died.
That's very quick.
It's very quick.
And there's another question here. Outside of Texas root rot, is there any other diseases from around the world showing similar symptoms?
No, we certainly looked at every possibility and every known pathogen and the symptoms, and there weren't any others that we were aware of or that we could find any literature on that would match this either.
And was there any weeds in the field showing similar symptoms?
No, there certainly were weeds at the end of the season in this field because of the death of the plant, and the weeds just took over in the end, but they were perfectly healthy that I could see.
Well, thank you, Linda. There might be some more questions that come in, and please, if you do have any questions, just keep putting them into that chat bar. So, Linda, I'll ask you to, we have stopped sharing your screen, and I'll get Shana Holman, biosecurity technical lead for CottonInfo, also based with QDAF in Toowoomba, to share her screen. So thank you, Shana. Over to you.
Thanks, Janelle. As Janelle mentioned, my name is Shana Holman. I'm the CottonInfo biosecurity tech lead, and also with Queensland Department of Agriculture and Fisheries. So today I just wanted to give you a bit of an update on just the importance of maintaining good farm biosecurity, particularly during this time. We currently don't know how this pathogen spreads, infects, or survives, so it's really important to be just doing some really good farm biosecurity practices. So farm biosecurity is a set of measures and practices designed to protect your farm or farms you work on from the entry and spread of pests, weeds and diseases. So practicing good farm biosecurity is not just important, or is important for the unknown threats, but it also is really important for prevention and management of endemic and pests and diseases such as verticillium wilt, reniform nematode and mealybug. So farm biosecurity practices that everyone entering and working on farms should be doing as part of their day-to-day routine. In regards to this pathogen and potential new disease, there are a few things that really want to get you thinking of what you can be doing to help protect your farm. So number one, be aware of what's happening on your farm, in your fields. Monitoring is going to be really important over the next season. And if you see something unusual, tell someone. In this case, if you see symptoms that Linda was talking about previously, give her or your state pathologist a call and organise to send in a sample to enable a proper diagnosis and, like Linda was saying, to very much understand the spread of this potential pathogen. Very much give them a call before sending in samples. I know sometimes different, you might be collecting samples differently, like Linda was talking about, and New South Wales DPI and QDAF may also have a few different ways of wanting or preferring to have their samples sent. So best off giving them a call because they may tell you to send it on a Monday rather than a Thursday or Friday. So just give them a call and a heads up that a sample is coming. If you're a researcher or someone visiting the farm as part of a field trial, tell the grower or consultant what you're seeing. You're an extra set of eyes in the field. So let them know that you're seeing something unusual. So this applies not just to this pathogen, but to anything unusual. So for biosecurity, sightings of unusual can include unexpected crop failures or abnormally high, sudden and unexplainable plant death or yield loss. So if you see something like that, please give the Exotic Plant Pest Hotline a call or your local pathologist or entomologist. So number two, practice Come Clean, Go Clean. So Come Clean, Go Clean is one of the simplest and most effective strategies for minimising the spread of pests, weeds and diseases both onto and off farm. So making sure your equipment, machinery and vehicles are clean is super vital because vehicles and machinery with soil, mud and trash are one of the easiest ways for pests, diseases and weeds to spread. Yeah, so definitely do that. And on the CottonInfo website, you can find the Come Clean, Go Clean wash down machinery best practice, which is a fantastic post that we're putting up in the shed and office. It's just a reminder. So you can find that on the CottonInfo website. So farm biosecurity plans are really great opportunities for you to assess where your biosecurity risks are coming onto your property and also off. And it lets you figure out what your risks are. So what are the ways that biosecurity risks, so such as pests, diseases and weeds, might be entering your farm, but how they also may potentially be leaving your farm as well. And it gives you the chance to assess the appropriate actions and practices you might implement to mitigate these risks. So, for example, putting up a farm biosecurity sign, where your wash down bay is. So a farm biosecurity plan is very much a living document. So it's meant to be something that's updated regularly, and it's very much where you are at that given point of time. So essentially, you don't need to have everything ticked off, but it lets you figure out what your next moves or actions that you may want to implement. So you can then list things often short-term goals and long-term goals. So something you can do next week versus something that might be a 12-month goal. So it's a really good way to assess and give you the opportunity to figure out what practices you're implementing and what you need to be implementing to make sure that you're mitigating all your biosecurity risks. And finally, very much communicate your biosecurity requirements to people entering your farm. So if you've got a farm biosecurity plan or any just requirements in general, make sure you're telling your agronomist, any researchers that may be entering the farm, because you need to be letting people know what your expectations are with people coming onto your farm and also you leaving or them leaving. One of the great ways you can find out some more biosecurity information is visiting the CottonInfo website, as well as the YouTube channel. We've got some fantastic videos up of growers and agronomists sharing their biosecurity tips. So as you can see, Matt Ploskin was giving his advice of how he practices farm biosecurity. And also the MyBMP website's got some great tools and resources that are available. And also I'm available to have a chat about anything you may need to know or any assistance that I can provide in your biosecurity journey. So thanks, Janelle.
Thanks very much, Shana. Question for Shana. How can growers develop a farm biosecurity plan?
Perfect question. So the farm biosecurity website that I mentioned before has a farm biosecurity action planner. So it's a great way that growers can have a template available. So you don't need to be reinventing the wheel or starting one from scratch. The farm biosecurity action planner very much lists some great, it pretty much provides some of the general risks often associated with farms. And it lets you see kind of what previously has been identified as a biosecurity risk. And it gives some actions that potentially growers may want to consider implementing or whether they can think of something themselves, because a farm biosecurity plan for you might look very different to your neighbour, but this template gives you a bit of a starting point. So definitely have a look at the farm biosecurity website, and that's a great place to start on getting a template and filling one in.
Excellent. Thanks, Shana. Well, please just keep putting your questions into that chat bar. We will come back to them at the end of after Sally's presentation. So we're going to pass over to Sally Seeney, who's with Cotton Australia, and she can have a look at the processes or the impacts of this industry level with regards to this new disease.
Thanks, Janelle, and afternoon, everyone. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview of what the process is that happens when you actually report a suspected new disease or insect pest. So I've just put a diagram up on the screen here that just gives the official process of what actually happens when a pest of biosecurity is reported. There's a couple of things I just want industry to really concentrate on and that are most relevant. So there are two key points that are most relevant to industry that I'm going to focus on when I just give you a brief overview of this reporting process. So the first one is in detection and reporting. So when you actually detect or report a suspected plant pest, the first point of call is the diagnosis. So what actually is it? And that role usually falls to the relevant state department. And so that is in determining what is the actual pest that's been reported and is it an EPP, which is an emergency plant pest. Once it's decided that it is likely to be an emergency plant pest, what happens then is that the State Department reports that to their State Chief Plant Health Manager, who reports it to the Chief Plant Protection Officer, who then advises the CCEPP. Now, the CCEPP is the Consultative Committee for Emergency Plant Pests. And on that committee sits a representative from all of the different plant industries. So Cotton Australia is the cotton industry representative on that committee, and there's also representatives from all the state's departments. And so the role of the CCEPP is to really firstly determine, is it an EPP? And if it is, what can be done about it? So can the pest be eradicated? Can it be contained to the area that it is in? And how is it going to be managed? And also it's about what is the message to industry. So what are we going to tell the growers and consultants about this pest and what can be done about it? And all of that information is what is called the response plan. As you can see up the top there, there's the SAP, that's the Scientific Advisory Panel. And so that's really just a panel of scientific experts that's brought in to help advise on how that response plan should look. The NMG, which is the National Management Group, again, has representatives from all of the different plant pest industries. And that's really about approving the response plan and approving any of the costs associated with that. What's the importance in reporting anything that you suspect that looks slightly unusual? The first advantage is in early detection. So the earlier that we can identify something, the improved chance we have of eradicating or containing the pest. And as Linda pointed out in this particular example with Utapella, the diagnosis is not always straightforward. So actually determining what the pest is and how it can be managed can take some time. So early detection is really, really important. And it's important not only in containing it within your own farm, but there's also potentially wider industry and community benefits if we can contain that pest earlier. Involving the CCE also has some benefits. Because you're involving all of the other plant industries and the states in the CCEPP, you can quite often have new knowledge from other areas. So has that pest been seen in other crops or other states? Or are there new diagnostic tools available in other states? So the CCEPP allows some of that knowledge sharing, which will hopefully lead to a more timely diagnosis and also a more effective response plan. The other thing that's really important for industry to be aware of is that reporting the pest and then having a designated response plan means that anybody that's impacted by the biosecurity response is eligible for owner reimbursement costs. So these costs are designed to cover any grower expense that's involved in a response plan. For example, if there's a pest that's determined in your crop and you are guided by the State Department that in order to eradicate that pest, you need to destroy the crop, then you'll be reimbursed for the costs involved. So whether that's the cost of destroying the crop and the lost income associated with it. So the intent of ORCs is to ensure that any growers impacted by a response are not better or worse off. And so it's really there to encourage that early detection and early reporting of costs with the knowledge that, you know, any costs you should be reimbursed for. Thanks, Janelle.
Thanks very much, Sally. I can recommend anyone, if there's an opportunity to go to some cotton industry biosecurity workshops in the future, it's very interesting and it's certainly worthwhile going because as you can see, the process, there's quite a lot involved, but it's not something I guess we need to be frightened of, and certainly they're very important processes. So, but yeah, to actually have some time out and go to those workshops are excellent. So if there's any questions for Sally, please just type them into the chat bar. We've just got a few other comments and questions within there. One back a little while ago, this will probably go to Linda, but are there any seed treatments available to use at the moment that we should be looking at in terms of these fungal diseases?
Until we know exactly what is causing this, you know, we can't really make comment about the seed treatments because we also don't know the mechanism by which the fungus or whatever it is invading the plant. So, for example, maybe, it might be nematodes involved, and maybe a nematicide would be a better choice. So until we have more information, it's really hard to know what would be the best means for managing. But if it is a fungus and based on how it's invading, seed treatment may be one of the possibilities for managing it, yes.
Thanks, Linda. Any more questions? Otherwise, we'll start to pull it up. But it's certainly been a very good webinar. Thank you, Linda, for your great explanations and diagrams. Obviously, we all need to keep our eyes wide open this season. We do anyway, but with a new disease possibly in our midst, and we be on the lookout for that. And you certainly have support. Any of the growers, the consultants, anyone out there in the field has support through Linda and the pathologists within the cotton industry, and CottonInfo and the regional extension officers and tech leads. So please just keep the communication lines open, and if you're seeing anything, please contact one of us. I don't think I've missed any other questions. There was a comment there with regards from Joe Koshman with regards to having similar symptoms being seen in cereal diseases, and Linda is planning on talking to Joe after that. So thank you very much, Joe, for pointing that out.
Well, thank you. And I hope you understand the importance of reporting any unusual plant symptoms this coming season. Please keep the communication lines open. Your local REO is here to assist, and we can help you with any necessary plant samples, or we can guide you in that reporting process. So thanks to our great team of presenters here today, Linda Smith, Shana Holman and Sally Sini. And thanks to all of you for joining this CottonInfo webinar. Good afternoon.